Everyone is vulnerable to being pinned when life plays hardball, whether it is a physical or mental health condition. No one can stand alone. For those who are not pinned, appreciate that it could be you or loved one someday. So when you see a chance to help someone, please do. They are not weak, they are pinned. Even a slight hand up and a listening ear can begin seriously lightening the load, change, or save a life. Help end stigma. Move from being pinned to purpose. Time for a hand up.
Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Moore. I'm the founder of the Pin to Purpose podcast, and it's a great pleasure for me today to welcome our guest, Michael Herman. I'll be talking a bit more about Michael and introducing him in a moment, but really happy he can join us today to talk about his lived experience and his engagement with mental health and helping people out. So before I introduce Michael more fully, I'd like to mention to people who maybe haven't seen this before that the reason that the Pin to Purpose podcast was founded was to help to shatter stigma, to have open conversations about mental health and well-being, and to give people a hand up on their healing journey. And our underlying kind of premise and motto is that basically people with mental health challenges and conditions are not weak, but they may be in a weakened state. So there's no shame in asking for a hand up and getting that. We're all human, and there are times when things can be, very, very heavy, very challenging. So Michael, it's fantastic to have you here. Thanks for coming. I'd like to read a quick bio, and then I'll pass it over to you to say a few more introductory words. So Michael Herman is a retired senior partner and former general counsel of Gowling, an international law firm. Over a career spanning more than 4 decades, he held senior leadership roles advising on governance, enterprise risk, and complex organizational challenges. Today, Michael focuses on mental health advocacy, using his lived experience to challenge stigma and reshape how the legal profession and other high-performance workplaces think about well-being. He is a frequent speaker to legal, corporate, and community audiences, and a contributing author to The Right Not to Remain Silent, The Truth About Mental Health in the Legal Profession. Michael serves on the board of directors of the Institute for Advancements in Mental Health, a national charitable organization dedicated to supporting individuals and families navigating complex mental health challenges and advancing systemic change in Canada. Through his speaking and writing, Michael works to create more open, supportive, and effective workplace cultures where people can speak honestly about mental health and be heard. So Michael, it's really fantastic to have you here. Congratulations on all the great work you've been doing. And maybe I can now pass it over to you to say a few more words to introduce yourself.
So thank you, Jeff. And before I begin talking a little bit about myself, I just want to applaud you on this initiative, Pin to Purpose. I also love the metaphor. I think it's great. And I think that the work you're doing with the initiative is really important. And every contribution that people are making to raising awareness and reducing stigma is an important contribution.
Thank you.
So let me tell you a little bit about how I came to seeing mental health and mental health advocacy as an important facet of my own journey. And when I was growing up, I was an anxious kid, and I would go through periods of pretty severe anxiety, primarily during major life transitions. But there was not much that I was told to do about it other than to push through, just push through. And that's the message I got. It's the message I internalized, and I would push through. And eventually I'd start to feel better. And when I went through difficult times, it was just push through, without realizing the tremendous toll cumulatively that was taking on me. And then in about 2016 or so, I started to have a number of not particularly serious, but repeating physical ailments, colds, viruses, digestive problems, and they would come and they would go and they would come and they would go. And eventually they just were sticking around more than they were not. And I started to find that I was being drained of all of my energy. And what happened was that I found that with no energy, I had no ability to focus and to concentrate. And I just eventually hit a wall and crashed, and I could not push through. So I decided to take a few months off just to rest, recuperate, maybe figure out what was going on, even though these weren't really serious illnesses that I was experiencing. And I thought in a couple of months I'd be better and be able to return to work and everything would be fine. And after 3 months, I tried going back to work and I just couldn't do it. And so that led to an indefinite leave and not knowing whether I was ever going to be able to return to work. But I continued to think I had to deal with the physical challenges that I was experiencing. And one morning, it was a beautiful sunny morning, early summer sunny morning, and we live in a condominium. And I was standing on the balcony overlooking the ravine that is behind the building, having a cup of coffee, and this thought popped into my head out of nowhere. What's the point? What's the point? And it staggered me. And in that moment, I fortunately realized that what I was dealing with was primarily not about the physical ailments that I was experiencing, but that I was having mental health challenges. And in fact, I was later diagnosed as having an acute or severe depressive episode. And so that started me on a completely different journey of recovery. And let me just take a moment to give people a sense of what depression felt like for me. It's hard to explain it. It's hard to express it. But for me, depression was waking up every morning and feeling as if I was being sucked into a deep, dark hole. And no light entered into that hole, and there was no escape from that hole. It was as if I was falling into an abyss every single day. And some days I would feel nothing, no emotions, no interest, just numb. Some days I would feel a sadness that was so profound that it hurt more than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. And some days I would feel like it was buried alive, and you can imagine the panic that went along. But that moment on the balcony, which set me on a different path, led me to lots of therapy, some medication that helped, a bunch of changes to my routines to bring about new ways of taking care of myself. We can talk perhaps a little bit more about some of those. And over a period of months, close to a year, I was eventually able to return to what may be described as a more normal life, where I was able to start working again full time and resume the typical activities that most people engage in. But recovery is something that will last the rest of my life. That's the way I look at recovery. And in the midst of the deepest, darkest moments for me, I made a commitment to myself that should I ever recover sufficiently to be able to resume, quotes, normal activities, that I would share my story. And I felt sort of called to do it because of the age and stage of my career. If not me, then who? There weren't many people doing it in law at the time. There were a few. But it was something that became a bit of a motivation for me to try to get better. And the idea and the objective behind it was pretty simple. If I could influence just one person to not struggle in silence, to reach out to somebody that they trust for help, if I could influence just one person, that was success. And I've now been speaking and writing and participating in different initiatives for the last 7 years or so. And that remains my objective, to influence just one person each time. And so that's the story that led me to becoming what some would call a mental health advocate. I say it's just talking about me and my experience, and trying to raise awareness and trying to not just reduce stigma, but to eradicate stigma, crush it. And we can talk a little bit more about that as well. And so that's the journey I've been on, and it's been extremely rewarding work.
It's fantastic. I'd like to explore a bit more and ask you about, as you were trying to deal with the, increasing pressures and depression, et cetera, and this is just broader questions, I guess, about culture. In a lot of professions, obviously there is quite a bit of stigma, or there's a fear of, the reactions, I guess, of the partners, or, the heads of different businesses, et cetera, about how they'll be perceived. And if somebody is perceived as being just weak and should be able to handle it, and then there's others that are understanding that it isn't really about weakness, it's about being in this weakened state of whatever form that is. So I'm just wondering, in terms of, the pressures that you might have felt, and the pressures in the profession broadly to that have people take more of a lonely journey for a while, which ideally, should not be the case.
It should not be the case. And unfortunately, it has too often been the case, not just in the legal profession, but in a lot of other professions, a lot of other sectors. And so part of the telling of my story is to try and open up dialogue, open up conversation, make it feel safer for people to be able to come forward. But you're right. And it's interesting with law. Law was late to the party. Law was a profession that did not recognize the challenges that people were experiencing, even though we now know that compared to the general population, lawyers have much higher rates of clinical depression, serious anxiety, substance misuse, burnout, and other mental health challenges. Fortunately, we've seen the legal profession come some way in terms of the raising of awareness, trying to bring down, and raising awareness helps, trying to bring down the effects of stigma. There still is a real disconnect, as you pointed out, Jeff, between actual stigma and the perception of stigma. But now what's important, and what we've also seen, is that within the legal profession, a lot more education, a lot more literacy, a lot more resources being provided for people in terms of how they can help themselves and take care of themselves. What we haven't seen in the legal profession, or in many professions, and it's the next step, and it's a difficult step, and it's going to be a tough step, is how do we start making changes to the way, to the culture? How do we embed mental health and wellness into the culture of organizations in order that people can thrive and therefore perform at the best?
Yeah, right. That fully aligns interests too, obviously, and that's where it's hard to argue. You know, if people are looking at it from a corporate or a partnership level, and they're seeing it's in their best interests, obviously, to have the best performing lawyer or partner or executive, then even away from the well-being of the individual, which ultimately should be the most important thing from a bottom line perspective. Obviously, there's real incentives to take care of your people, your greatest asset.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And what's interesting is that now the case for it is so clearly been evidence driven, supported. And so you're right, it's the right thing to do. But the business case for it is very clear in terms of the cost of having people who aren't doing well, and the benefits if you have people who are doing well. And the ways to go about doing it are out there, and there are people who are there to help organizations make the changes that will help them and their people embed mental health and well-being into the culture. And yet what we see is that workplace mental health is not improving. So it's interesting you raise this. Is a little project that I'm undertaking right now is to explore that and to understand why that's the case. In other words, what is missing? What isn't happening that is causing organizations not to take the steps that will allow them to have both high performance, because that's important, but also in conjunction with that, having people who are doing well and thriving within the organization. Something is not getting translated. And so we're not seeing enough organizations making those changes, making those shifts. In law, there are structural barriers to those changes. There's no question about it. There's certain things that I can't change. But there are things we can do. And so the question becomes, why aren't those things happening? And I come at it from the perspective that the leaders of organizations, would be it law firms or any other organization, they're not bad people. They don't want their people to be sick. They just don't know what to do. And they're not finding out what to do. Or if they are finding out what to do, for whatever reasons, they're not actually doing it. And so what is it that's keeping that from happening? So that's an inquiry, and I hope to speak to a lot of different people from across different disciplines to try and understand that a little bit better.
And behind some of that, I mean, you were a lawyer for a long time. I understand you're retired from law now, but do you believe that part of it is the conditions, like just, it's a fast-paced world. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of stress. So that feeds into like pressure and but still the requirement of the top level performance and outcomes and solutions.
Yeah, there's no question that while technology plays a big role in improving productivity, it also means we're available 24/7.
Right.
And one of the things we as lawyers complain about now is that we no longer have time to think. I started practicing law, if one drafted an agreement and was sending it to the other side, it took several days before you got something back, and then you had time to think about it and absorb it and send it back, with your comment. Now everything happens like instantaneously. And the expectation is that it will happen instantaneously. And the expectation that you'll be available 24/7 is very much present. So technology creates pressure. Uncertainty creates pressure. And we've been living in an extraordinarily uncertain environment for quite a number of years right now. And AI is just getting worse. So that's a real obstacle. In law, the business model for most law firms is based on the billable hour, because that's how clients are billed. So the more billable hours, the more profitable the law firm. Law firms need to be profitable to satisfy their partners and to be competitive. And so that has the effect of putting a lot of pressure on lawyers to increase the number of billable hours that they're working. That is going to have detrimental effects unless there are things in place that allow those lawyers to take care of themselves within the organization. So, you know, there are structural barriers, things that people have talked about the fact that the billable hour should be, you know, eliminated since I started practicing law many, many, many years ago. And yet it is still the dominant method by which law firms bill their clients. And clients expect to be billed.
Absolutely. I just wanted to comment. It's interesting because I do this podcast, and when I speak to people I know or colleagues from different clients I have, I mean, I've run into a couple of lawyers who, you know, a man and a woman, different, they don't work together, they're in different parts of law, but, you know, who've opened up to me about some of their challenges and the stresses, and then another corporate client. And I mean, it's human, right? I mean, everybody is dealing with varying degrees of pressure and stress at any one time. And so again, the resiliency and the shattering of stigma that you're trying to, you know, be engaged in, that I'm trying to be engaged in, that others, it reflects, a universal story, which is people can end up, you know, behind the scenes of lawyers, doctors, you know, anybody in any field. We're all human. We've got to figure this out and give each other a bit of flexibility.
And as you point out, and Pin's purpose points out, is we will all experience challenges and we all need help at times. And so it's important that we're there for each other. And most people do want to help. And so they may not know how, but if we can give them the tool, they do want to help. And I used to talk about it's important to reduce stigma. I now talk about eradicate stigma.
Very good. Very good. Yeah.
Part of the reason why I learned a lot of lessons as a result of my experience and the recovery that I continue to go through. But one of the lessons, and probably the biggest lesson I learned, was I thought I did not stigmatize people who had mental health challenges. What I didn't realize is that when it came to me, I bought into stigma completely. Self-stigma is a huge problem. And what self-stigma did to me is it caused me to bury, it caused me to avoid, it caused me to ignore what was going on inside of me. And that led to shame. I don't know if there's a more toxic emotion than shame.
Right.
And I think it's Brené Brown who says, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we're capable of positive change. So if I was going to recover, the first thing I had to learn to do, and this is where therapy played an extremely important role, was I needed to address the shame that I was experiencing, to allow those things to come to the surface so I could work with them. And somewhat counterintuitively for me, and you know, everybody's different, but for me, that started with acceptance. And by finding a way to accept it and not judge it, that opened up space. And that space gave me the opportunity to start to chip away at that shame and those thoughts and those beliefs that I had bought into. And that then opened up the path for recovery.
Yeah. In a moment, I want to ask you if there's some of the other, parts of the journey that you were mentioning before that you have lived through and experienced that may be helpful to others. But I would like to stop a bit on what you just said, because I think for our listeners, especially anybody who's challenged right now or struggling, that's your message now is critical. It's a key message, and one for everybody to focus on for a second. I think you and I spoke a few weeks ago, and I think you mentioned it, and I've heard this before, and I believe in it too. But along those lines, it said that if you were sitting on a park bench with a friend who was struggling, you would be listening, you'd be empathetic, you'd be trying to help them. And so, that's the type of way we have to be able to treat ourselves as our own best friend. And so many people, and I was caught in that too. I felt terrible when I had my own hospitalization and I couldn't believe I was there. I was thinking I'm letting everybody down, letting just everybody down. And yet, and so the weight, coming back to this, the metaphor and pin to purpose too, the weight that we put on ourselves on top of everything else, it's not going to make it easier at that moment to get out of it. So I think what you just told everybody who's listening, in terms of being able to accept and just try to get rid of the shame and accept the hand up and accept the love for yourself, and knowing you've done many things in your lifetime. This may be a tougher patch, but there's brighter days ahead that you can get to, but not as easily on your own.
No, not as easily on your own. And I think you've touched on a really important point. And all the wisdom traditions that I'm aware of all focus on compassion. And we think of compassion as having compassion for others. But if we do not have self-compassion, if we do not have compassion for ourselves,
right,
it starts with ourselves, it is really hard to then be able to have compassion for others.
Mm-hmm.
But if we start with ourselves, that then opens up again the pathway to be able to start to have compassion for others.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a guy named George Saunders, who's an author. He's an American author, and he gave a very famous commencement address, or I'm not sure if it was a commencement address, but he gave it at Syracuse University, his alma mater. And one of the things he said is, what I regret most in my life are my failures of kindness. And I thought that was just a great line.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And again, so it starts with the self, and then it can spread to others.
Yeah. I want to make one more comment on that, and then I'd like to come back to you on asking you about I'm looking at the name here, but I asked you to talk to people about your book, The Right Not to Remain Silent, The Truth About Mental Health in the Legal Profession. The quick thing I'd like to say before that, though, was interesting, because I had a very very clear example of that on my own healing journey when I was trying to get my first job back after quite an extended period off. And I went to Toronto for some interviews and did very well, and became a finalist to get a sales job like I had in the past. But I had to go to Boston for the other interviews for the finalists with one other person, and there were six. I had to speak to 6 people over a full day. And I felt, and I really wasn't confident then, because I was, my self-talk, having, gone through what I'd gone through, my confidence was shaken. I wasn't at my best by a long shot. And they actually told me after, they said, who showed up in Boston? They said, the guy we met in Toronto is very different. You've had a great career, you did all this, and then this guy in Boston seemed different. And I wasn't going to explain it, but that was a fact, because my self-talk was like, I almost eliminated myself. I didn't feel I was ready. I didn't think I was at the standards I was at before. So, there can be countless examples of that, I'm sure, with tons of people who can tell stories that are, unique but similar. And it comes back to your point, Michael, of that forgiveness, of the getting rid of shame. But you need to have a hand up, or at least others on your journey to help you to get there, and maybe remind you, like you say, it can be a lifelong journey for all of us.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And here's the book, The Right Not to Remain Silent.
That's great.
You can Google it and find a link to be able to buy a book. All the royalties go to CAMH.
Amazing.
The Center for Mental Health and Addiction. So yeah, it's done very well.
Yeah. Well, tell us more, whatever you'd like to tell us about the book, because it sounds fascinating. It sounds, and it covers it's interesting because you're talking about the profession. So, that's an opportunity, I would imagine anyway, for your entire profession to take a look at that and really get into, the topic we're speaking about here, about the well-being of lawyers, but also how it improves the productivity for these partnerships. But tell us anything you'd like to about the book.
Yeah, so the book came together, it was really the brainchild of two of the co-editors who are also contributing authors, and they talk about their own lived experience. And the book came together because there was like a community of people who were opening up and sharing their lived experience, and we were getting to know each other. And so they thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take people from across in the legal profession, from across the country, judges, lawyers in private practice, lawyers who work in-house, big firm, small firm, big city, small town, and have each of them share their own story in a book. And the idea behind it was to start to, again, motivate and stimulate dialogue and constructive discussion and normalize conversations about mental health and mental health in the legal profession and even beyond the legal profession. And so the book includes judges, it includes all of these different types of people who are in the profession, each of whom shares their own personal experience.
That's great.
We have done much better than we thought we were going to do with it in terms of the objective that we set, the number of presentations we've done, panels we've sat on, discussions that we've had, and what we hear about going on within organizations as a result of their working with the stories in the book. And so that was the purpose of the book, again, about raising awareness and bringing down that stigma.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You're involved in a variety of organizations. One of them is Unsinkable, which is how you and I met, because the executive director, Haley Heckman, introduced us. And shout out to Haley, who's a fantastic person. And Unsinkable is a wonderful organization.
Great organization.
Yeah. And so I wondered, if you want to make any comments about them. I've just recently gotten involved, but you've been involved with them for quite some time. And it's I think Unsinkable and Haley and her colleagues and everyone are really doing some important work in storytelling and beyond for the mental health space.
So I have a tremendous amount of respect for Unsinkable. I've done several programs with them. I think part of what appeals to me about Unsinkable, there are a number of things, but the key element that I think is so valuable is the power of stories. When someone stands up and talks about the science or the statistics or, that touches us here. We get it, we hear it, and we register it in our brain. When someone stands up and tells their story, that gets us here. And that connects us. And then we're interested in that person's story. And that's important, not just to the listener, to the person hearing the story. It's also extremely affirming and powerful. You were talking about the need to sort of not judge oneself, the need to be forgiving, the need to be accepting, telling one's story, and unsinkable in particularly working with younger people and giving them a way to express their own lived experience is extremely helpful to the individual. So it accomplishes both. It helps the person who has been through the experience, and it helps those who are hearing the experience, because stories are so powerful.
Mhm. Absolutely. You also serve, as I mentioned at the beginning, I guess, on the board of directors of the Institute for Advancements in Mental Health. And I guess the acronym is IAM or IAM. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
IAM.
I
Okay.
am.
IAM. I got it. That makes sense. I am. Okay. So I don't know if you're doing, important work there. If there's anything you'd like to mention about them, it sounds like they are doing, very important work.
Yeah, I've been on the board of IAM for about 6 years now, and it's a small charity. As you mentioned it off the top, it focuses on helping people dealing with complex and often overlooked mental health challenges. It supports both the individuals who are dealing with the challenges and their caregivers, and really important to be supporting the caregivers. And it does it through both counseling and education. And a key element in what IAM does is it tries to be there with both the person who is dealing with the challenges and the people supporting them through the whole journey, and back through integration into a more full life, and not just being defined by their illness, as opposed to, deal with the crisis and then move on and leave the person alone. So trying to be there through that journey, and by doing that, also try to identify where there are real serious gaps in what is a very fragmented and dysfunctional mental health ecosystem.
Right. Yep.
And then once it can identify those gaps, is work with communities and other organizations, and partner with other groups to try and fill those gaps, so that some of that fragmentation, some of that disconnection can be addressed. So it's a small charity, but in my view, it's doing really important work, and it's been a privilege to be on the board for the past 6 years.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about the concept of purpose in a healing journey also. And just at the outset, suggest, that nobody needs to have, one overriding purpose, or think they need to focus on only one purpose in their lifetime. It can change over time. But in terms of, sometimes when people are really getting pinned and challenged, et cetera, and dealing with self-talk that's very negative, to have a reminder of some type of North Star, whether it's, family, pet, something they love, traveling, food, anything, but, purpose that focuses on something that has meaning to them, that they would like to spend more time on again. And then, so there's that part, but also, then coming through a healing journey, the community and connection that's so valuable to people, to be invited, if they can't find it on their own, into activities where, their contribution is valued, and there's a purpose in the, collective efforts. I don't always talk to guests about this, although my intention really is to do that as much as possible going forward, because, the pinned part is obviously that getting really gradually to the point where you just cannot move and are really in a tough spot. 2 is, you can't do it alone, and you need a hand up on your healing journey at times. It's understandable. But the purpose is another part that I think is interesting to explore a little bit and just get insights from our guests on how they see that, as maybe how they've experienced it in their own journey. It sounds like, your mental health advocacy also is also driven very much by purpose, and through your own suffering, that you've come forward to really help others. So I'm talking way too much here, but I'm just trying to throw out purpose.
No, you're being very eloquent about it, actually, and it really is important. And I want to touch on purpose, and I want to touch on another word, hope. You're right that I think purpose is really crucial, and I think purpose is very much unique to each of us. Each of us has to find our own purpose. For me, when I was in the depths of my severe depressive episode, my purpose was to try to recover sufficiently to be able to return to work. And that was not, this grand purpose, but it was a pretty big one for me at the time.
Absolutely.
And it was interesting because I did not know these statistics when I was going through. I learned them later. But the statistics are that if you've been on disability leave for up to 6 months, there's a good chance that you will return to work. If you've been on leave for more than 6 months, the odds drop dramatically. And if you're off for more than 9 months, such as was my case, they get really bad. And I'm glad I didn't know those statistics at the time.
Yeah, right.
But just in terms of my recovery, having that as a goal for me was really helpful in guiding where the journey was taking me, why I was doing it, and what I was trying to accomplish. And the idea for me was around purpose was less about the attainment and more about the process. That often there are things that we do not control that will affect whether or not we'll attain whatever we set as our purpose. But if we focus on what we think is important, what we care about, and then the process of how we are going to work towards it, that we can control. That's something we can do. And that is incredibly valuable. And to me, it goes together with hope. So when I was in the depths, I was hopeless. That I had no clue how I was ever going to get out of that deep, dark hole. And when I had my moment on the balcony, it was like this little sliver of light that came into the hole. And that was a teeny bit of hope that maybe I'm onto something that's going to help me. And then slowly, and there were a lot of, 2 steps forward, 1 step back process of recovery. I was able to make my way out of that hole. And it was hope that propelled me. It was like fuel. So one of the things I talk about when I'm either speaking to somebody who is struggling or just talking to an audience and talking about the challenges that we all will experience is the importance of not losing hope and holding on to hope as best as one can, because it is something that will help you find strength.
Yeah, beautiful. I wanted to ask you if there's, I think we've covered quite a lot of ground here, and but I wanted to ask you if there's any other topic or any other points that, or any other information, anything else you'd really like to focus on and share with our listeners, or and I often ask people towards the end if they have any final comments, basically, especially for listeners who may be struggling now. I feel what you've just said really is super powerful and is really the type of answer to that question. But Michael, I want to pass the floor back to you if there's other topics you want to speak about, and if there's, and at the end, if there's anything else that you wanted to say.
No, I think we've covered everything. I usually end with hope, but you brought in purpose, and I thought the two went together. So, but I will ask audience members that if they are interested in talking about the challenge that I'm looking into, which is about, we know having people who are doing well is good, increases performance and increases productivity, and yet for some reason it isn't happening within organizations and they have thoughts about it. Please, I'd love to hear from people who have thoughts about that or ideas about it, and I'd look forward to having discussions with anybody.
That's great. Okay, and I guess we'll sort that out afterwards in the YouTube chat, or just in terms of the way that people will get a hold of you. But we can sort that out so that listeners can reach out to you.
Right? Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Sure. So, Michael, it's been great to have you as a guest on the Pin to Purpose podcast. Thanks for sharing your journey. Wonderful to hear how you've battled through and what you're doing now, and we're aligned with the battle to shatter or end stigma. So it's great to spend time talking to you today.
It's always great to spend time with allies. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks again. Take care, Michael.
Bye-bye.